Alrighty, so I'm Rosemary Wang. I'm a developer advocate for HashiCorp. And I'm up here to tell you not a continuous delivery success story. This is a small toy example of something that I tried to do for myself. And it's not perfect. And the reality is getting to continuous delivery, getting through all of this is really difficult, right? So this is my best attempt to hack a socio-technical system, specifically myself. And it will have elephants, so I'll explain that in a little bit, but we'll get there. We'll get there, I promise. All right, so this started about 3 years ago or so when I started to be a traveling consultant. And as an engineer who was a traveling consultant, I was required to hold a lot of devices. This is a picture of privilege, right? So I have worked for companies who have the privilege of procuring these devices for me and requiring that I use them to a certain degree. I would have a 15-inch MacBook Pro from my client because they wanted all of their devices in one kind of registration. I would have my company's laptop. I would also have the iPad because I wasn't allowed to watch Netflix on either laptop. So I would have to carry the iPad to watch my Netflix. And then I would have to carry a hotspot because when I had to get on calls in airports, I needed some kind of Wi-Fi connection. And then eventually to power the two laptops, that one of which might die, I had to get a power bank, which always gets flagged in airport security. And then eventually I had to get this microphone, which helped with all the audio when people asked me, what are you saying on these calls? Basically, these are a lot of devices, and no matter what I asked, right, I was like, why do I have to carry these things? And I got a whole slew of reasons, which kind of bucketed into about 3. First of all, security. So I was told that with these physical devices, it would ensure intellectual property constraints, right? So intellectual property from my client wouldn't be on my work laptop, other work laptop, right? On top of that, they were like, if you ever use any client personal identifying information because you're doing some testing, we can't have that across multiple devices. We have to have that on a managed device. Well, it kind of was weird, right? Because I was like, well, why would I have PII on my laptop anyway? That just doesn't feel good, right? And then when both of those didn't really pass my muster, one of the developers would come up to me and say, it's for productivity reasons. I'm like, what do you mean by productivity reasons? They said, well, if you have the same MacBook as everybody else, all the install instructions work exactly perfectly, right? So basically, we expected our laptops to be containers. More on that later. But the idea was that we would actually be able to do this uniformly across the board, which is why everybody had to have a 15-inch MacBook, and someone warned everybody else not to update to Catalina. So I love the last reason when both of those failed and I didn't buy into it was, I love my development machine. The number of people who told me I've customized my terminal beautifully. By the way, if you've done this, no judgment, it's just some people really enjoy doing that. So when I would pair with someone else who was another developer, they would proceed to take my laptop and proceed to configure it just like theirs. So really, everybody likes the development machines. We craft these bespoke machines for ourselves, right? And in that case, we're our own socio-technical system where we're interacting with our beautiful bespoke machine that we love to develop on. And so all of these reasons didn't really make much sense to me, right? And it came down to physical resources are better than the logical. We can touch them. It's tactile. We can respond to them. They're interactive systems. But are physical resources really better than the logical? And it kind of came to a rude awakening whenever I would walk and my back started hurting. And it got so bad to a point where I actually have to wear a back brace. I'm not wearing it up here right now because it's itchy, but it's actually pretty painful. So I was like, is it really? Is it really? And then I looked at the numbers, okay? Stay with me, all right? So there's 6.4 million metric tons of e-waste reported to have been in landfill in the US in 2017. Now, I don't know what 6.4 million metric tons actually looks like, right? But e-waste effectively is laptops, cell phones, all these physical devices I put on that picture. That's the equivalent, I did the math, of 1.2 million Asian elephants in equivalent weight. That's a lot of Asian elephants. Now, how many Asian elephants are there in the wild in the world? Not that, Yeah, not that many. It's actually about less than 50,000. So basically, our e-waste, our weight of e-waste far exceeds the weight of the population of Asian elephants in the world, right? Which is a pretty sobering thought. And not only that, my back also hurts. So of all of this, all of these numbers from even a larger standpoint and myself, I'm like, okay, there's got to be something better. The point is, physical resources have a cost, right? They have a monetary cost in the amount that my employers fortunately were able to procure for me, but also they have a cost from the physical and even environmental if you want to extend to that, right? And so I said, all right, a lot of vendors have tried to do this. A lot of people have tried to do this virtual development experience, right? A development environment or a desktop environment. But let me try to do it myself because I like bespoke, lovingly crafted development environments. And so I want mine to be bespoke, lovingly crafted via pipeline. So why not make that extension, right? So let me reduce the friction of how I deliver said virtual desktop with my lovely pipeline in continuous delivery, right? So let me reduce that friction a bit. If I can predictably and reliably create a development environment on demand, maybe I'll be incentivized to use it, and I'll just run it on one tablet so I don't have to carry 2 laptops. Now I have to carry 1 laptop and my tablet so I can watch Netflix. But at least I could run one development environment on my tablet, right? So let's see if this is possible. So this is what remote desktop continuously delivered looks like. I built an immutable image for my desktop tools. Yes, slightly over-engineered, but I had to do it. And so then I was like, all right, now I have to deploy to a region of my choice. The reason why I choose region of choice is because I'm traveling a lot. So if I'm in Europe, I want to actually deploy my development environment in Europe. And then I want to run it on my tablet so I can travel lighter and reduce the overall cost, right? So let's see if I can do this. So the first thing was the immutable image of desktop tools. All right, so this is interesting, right? I am an IDE user. I have to admit that I like IDEs. So I was like, all right, I have to find a desktop environment with a GUI so I can use my IDE and manipulate between browsers because I like keeping browser tabs ad infinitum. So I decided I'd try Chrome Remote Desktop. It's actually a really nice tool. I highly recommend. And what it would do is create kind of a remote desktop binary that you can actually run, and it connects, allows you to connect. So pretty simple. And then I like Virtual Studio Code and all of its associated extensions. I have a lot of extensions I like. Golang, Git, Terraform, and Docker. Those are the ones that I use the most, and that's why I wanted to start with those and see and build up what I got. So we'll see what happens, right? And I need to build some scripts to install the packages. But the problem is I'm notoriously bad at bash scripting sometimes. So before I needed the cloud, I decided I'd test those scripts with Vagrant. So I'm using the original HashiCorp tooling, Vagrant, right, to basically determine whether or not these scripts even run to completion in the first place. And I also could actually change the privilege level so that it would mimic the kinds of things that I would do in production, quote unquote, which is on my development environment. So basically, all these scripts install a bunch of stuff. The repository will be listed later, so if you're curious what's in them, you can feel free to take a look. So then I was like, all right, I'll continuously deliver the image. It's used Vagrant up for a local test. I was going to try to put Vagrant on an external machine and run it, but I didn't get a chance to do that yet. And then I commit push any changes. Circle CI then uses Packer to build it. So Packer is another HashiCorp tool. It bakes a bunch of images. And so Packer just calls the same script and pushes it into Google. So it's simple, right? It looks literally 3 steps right here. So it's not that bad. It basically has some setup stuff. I do a quick unit test, and I'll explain my unit testing later because it's flux. It's not really a unit test. And then I build it and test it. There is actually a test script internal to my Packer build and internal to my Vagrant build. It was originally an inspec, except Ruby just took too long to install and build, so I just decided to keep it as bash. All right, so that's the simple stuff, right? That's Packer that's deploying an immutable image. Next was a little more complicated. How do I deploy to a region of my choice in a reliable way? All right, so in order for you to do successful continuous delivery, you need some formulation of testing, right? And testing is hard in infrastructure. I acknowledge that. Everybody has struggles when you try to do infrastructure, especially when it's a remote desktop, because there's some manual steps. So what tests could I reasonably make within my continuous delivery pipeline? Well, I could make a unit test, right? So the idea is that maybe what I could do was build some tests that check if maybe my runtime environment was roughly what I expected it to be. It's a little loose. But contract tests were kind of important in this regard because I was making one external connection to actually Terraform Cloud. And so I wanted to make sure that my inputs match my outputs, right? What I expected to pass to Terraform Cloud should be exactly what is in Terraform Cloud. Integration testing, I was kind of like, I don't really have anything for that. I don't know what to do with that. And then end-to-end was just going to be me manually testing it because I could not figure out an automated testing way to actually do GUI clicks and stuff in desktop environments. So that's something I got to learn. But in the meantime, I was like, I could do unit and contract tests, right? And now my unit tests are not actually a unit test. Sorry, everybody. So it's technically, it does require external components, right? It checks if the runtime variables have been defined. And by runtime variables, I mean my pipeline or my environment. So actually within what I like to do is, and as you can see, everybody can see that from back there as well. I try to make it as big as possible. And so basically the lovely part about making this unit test is that all it really does is check if the environment is defined, right? So let's make sure my Google application credentials are defined and my public key, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, all these things should run locally. So I've done my environment already. So I've already set these environment variables. I'm just making sure that they even set, right? Otherwise, my pipeline passes and I'm just wasting my time. And so I just want to make sure that that's set. So that's my version of a unit test. Not exactly a unit test because it should be self-contained, but it's at least helpful. It gives me really fast feedback, and that's the idea of having a unit test in the first place, right? All right, so contract tests. Contract tests match actual outputs to expected inputs. So this is very common in microservices. And what I said was well, I like doing this in infrastructure because there are common variables that all pass between infrastructure components, and I need to make sure that they make sense. So my contract tests actually look between Terraform Cloud, which is my SaaS for running Terraform, and Circle CI to make sure that they actually make sense, right? So if I take a look at my code once again, and I look at my contract tests, the idea is that I'm just going to check if the variables match. Now, this was a really quick check if the number of variables is 8 and it's equal or less than to 8. There were more complicated checks, except what happened was that I just didn't have a chance to fix them up as I was iterating on this. So if I were to go back, I would actually check for very specific variables instead. But the idea is that it calls out to a SaaS, which is in Terraform Cloud, and checks if the variables match, right? So that's a quick contract test. Let me go back to this. Sorry, y'all. Okay. All right. So next, deploy the changes, right? I've got a pipeline. I've done some testing just to make sure my pipelines are ready. So let me get ready to deploy some changes. So manually, I have to get this refresh token. The thing about Chrome Remote Desktop is that you actually have to get this OAuth refresh token, and its lifetime is ambiguous. I haven't actually fully figured out how to reverse engineer this yet, and I've been doing it for about 2 months now. But you have to go get this manually and then put it into your variables in order for you to initialize your remote desktop. So basically, I get this refresh token, I pop it into my Circle CI environment variables, and then I just trigger the pipeline, and it runs. And it takes actually about 3 minutes or so to spin up. So if you actually look at this pipeline here, which I ran earlier today, it takes about 3 to 5 minutes or so, which is kind of neat. So not so bad, right? Not so bad at all. All right, so this is what basically I decided to do. I was like, all right, great. I've got this pipeline. I choose a region. In this case, I'm in US East 4. That's the one I'm closest to right now. So I'll just actually run it through and apply it. I've already done this before because it takes time. All right, so the next step was let me run it on my laptop. The idea was to travel lighter on my tablet. The idea was to travel lighter and reduce cost. And this kind of looks actually pretty much like this. I actually think it will work today, so I don't think this needs to happen there. But if I actually go in here, when I run the pipeline, it just comes up with this, which is Rosemary Remote US East 4A. Which for those of you who probably have tried to do some kind of virtual desktop thing, you're like, wait, you just ran a pipeline and created yourself a virtual desktop. Yes, I did do that. And so really when it runs, it pops up like this. I just click on it, and I just enter my PIN, which I've predefined, and it's secured in Terraform Cloud, which is my SaaS that runs Terraform, a Terraform config basically. And as you can see, there is a full desktop environment here. It's kind of, it's Linux, it's XFCE, and so here I just have my Virtual Studio Code. I have Docker on here, which runs, and I have all of my Go binaries as well. So what I'll do is I'll check out code, and I'll just work in this environment here. So this is actually clean, and I do that every time. Now, the downside is I actually didn't bring my iPad because, like I said, back issues. So what I ended up, I was like, oh, let's see if this works on my phone. Because the app is available, the app for Chrome Remote Desktop is on Apple Store. So I was like, let me try it on Android. It actually, unfortunately, there's no camera for anybody to see this, but I can actually authenticate through my phone too. Now, it's really hard to type Docker PS on the phone because there's no keyboard. But what's really cool is that if I did want to reference something or if I did forget some code that I didn't push, I have some aliases that I can set, and then it will actually allow me to push it from here. So what's really fun about this is that if I actually had to shut down an instance, then I would go back to my phone and just be able to do it. So it's a pretty neat thing to do. I was like, oh, this is pretty fun. I actually kind of enjoyed this. And so the only caveat to the whole iPad thing was that the modifier keys don't work. And something I didn't really recognize when I first did this was the interaction between hardware and other hardware, as is the case. The modifier keys on the iPad Bluetooth keyboard for some reason didn't work. So I'm still debugging why the keyboard configuration isn't quite right. I'd love to automate all of the end-to-end testing on this just to make sure it's good. So if anybody has any ideas on how to automate GUI through GUI, on a Linux, a Linux operating system, I would be really interested to hear. All right, so this is the fun part, right? Cost optimization. I don't use this all the time. That's not the idea. The idea is that I use this when I travel because it's a lot easier to keep everything self-contained in one place. And so I only use it on demand, which means it's really amenable to this whole cloud thing, right? So I schedule a weekly shutdown. It's just a simple cron job in Circle CI that does it. And it really forces me to build better development discipline. We talked about how being in continuous delivery, you wanted to commit small, you wanted to commit atomically, and you wanted to commit frequently. And while building better development habits on a machine that shuts down every week on you is probably a good thing, right? So I don't have anything locally that's just committed there. And plus my tabs, I'm like, it forces me to clean up my tabs because I have usually 100 tabs open. So that's what happens on my cost optimization. It comes out to about $8 if I run it for a week. All right, so there's a lot of tech debt in this, right? As in any delivery project, software delivery project, there's usually some kind of tech debt. And so I have secrets. Yes, they're not exposed, but they could be better. So there are some integrations that I would love to make. I'd love to be able to bootstrap this, and I have my GitHub keys and stuff and everything there, which is cool. I'd love to automate that retrieval of the refresh token. I've been trying to reverse engineer that for a while. So I'll let you know when I figure that out. The security scanning piece, I'd love to add to the Packer pipeline, mostly because I'm used to it. So I'll usually add a security scanning benchmarking stuff at the end. So I'll scan the VM or I'll scan kind of the packages available. And I need to lock down the networking. Right now, it kind of just lets you log in. And I need to do some testing on that, right? So those would be tests after the fact, after I've spun up my dev environment, right? Auditing logins, I think this is something that was more relevant whenever I was doing this with clients, right? So I wanted to make sure that I had audit logs ready to say no, I didn't move any of this off this machine. It's still isolated within this virtual environment. Better lifecycle management, I think I could get really cool with this where it just syncs with my calendar and says, if you're going to be in Europe for 3 days, spin it up for the 4 days, right, with some buffer time. So of course, over engineering, right, but lovingly bespoke crafted environment here. Cost estimation, and there's actually cost estimation in Terraform Cloud, which is the SaaS. I didn't show much of it today, but there's cost estimation, so maybe it would be cool to just say hey, it will cost me $8 or something for the week. Again, this is similar to developing a product, similar to developing a service, right? You do have some things that you just decide you're not going to do for a little bit until you actually have time to do it, but you get the functionality done, and you go back and you look at some of what you need to do later. All right, so is this frictionless? Well, it took a while to set up, and it still has some steps to go. From a security standpoint, I feel like if you were to ever do this and address every single security question and ask that everybody asked of you from a device management standpoint, you still need to do some auditing steps. Developer productivity, which is like the core of continuous delivery to a certain degree, and DevOps, there are pipelines. Like, I could do this in some pipelines, and I did it with some manual steps, but for the most part, I just sort of did it and then pushed, and it was done. And do I love my development machine? Well, I have my IDE, which I'm pretty happy about. I have, a browser and an integrated environment that's self-contained that I can just, tab and then come back to, or I can just develop. But I think what's really nice about it for me personally is that it's a distraction-free development environment. What's really weird about my laptop is that I have Slack, I have email, I have all these things, right, notifications that come in and interrupt me, right? And from kind of a development standpoint, it's not terribly productive. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of like push and forget this for maybe like, 10 minutes. I'll go get a coffee, come back, I get this environment, and I get to work for a couple hours, without Slack or notifications bombarding me, which is kind of nice. And it's really good on trains. I did it yesterday. Because, trains, you don't really want to look at your Slack anyway. But reduced cost. Was it really reduced cost at the end? It was kind of nice, because of the back issue, they recommended I get a smaller laptop, like a really small laptop. And the problem was, like, I didn't want to pay for the laptop, right? There were better things I could be doing. So I was like, I don't want to pay for this really expensive, tiny laptop just because of this back issue. I've already done enough. And so I said, well, what if I did this, and I did this on my iPad? And the answer is actually it does come out to a reduced cost over time. I could give you the exact numbers. I didn't put them on the slide. I just ran them last night. But it was really interesting because it ended up kind of helping me understand what was truly on demand, what are the things that I actually needed to develop productively. And I didn't necessarily need the tiny laptop that cost a lot of money. So it was pretty much good enough for me. And the point about all of this, and why I brought it all up in the first place, was that for me personally, the reason why I did this exercise was that it was me trying to do better. Right? And DevOps is about trying to do better and empowering others to do better too, right? So it's about constantly figuring out what can you do to improve either your lifestyle in some regard as a developer or even someone else's ability to get good development experiences. And I think this is a really cool exercise that I did that created a lovingly bespoke environment, but also extends to other people. So if you would like to create your own lovingly bespoke environment via continuous delivery, you could also do that too. And while I may never actually go through 3,000 laptops in my lifetime, 3,000 laptops is the equivalent weight to one Asian elephant. While I may never go through 3,000 laptops in my lifetime, a lot of companies do. They go through thousands and thousands of these laptops. And you go through lots of these devices, right? Just because you say, I need to upgrade and it's better hardware, et cetera. And well, cumulatively, actually, if we all think about not necessarily getting the new laptop and maybe still investing in some lovingly crafted bespoke environments delivered through continuous delivery for yourself, you might find out that you can save a couple Asian elephants too. Or you can at least enjoy them at the zoo. All right, so if you have any, if you're curious or you have any inkling to go through, improve on this, you're curious, you can check out some of these links here. Kudos to a lot of the teams and tools that I've actually featured here. Chrome Remote Desktop, Hacker Builder, Terraform Cloud, VS Code, CircleCI, all of them are great tools that I use in combination and hack it all together so I can run around with no laptop at all. Not the case, I have a laptop right now. And if you ever have any questions, you can feel free to shoot me a message, and you can take a look at the repository listed up here. I'll have the link to this deck. So thank you very much.
So when you were considering doing remote virtual desktop, did you consider an alternative like the VS Code remote or something like Eclipse Che?
Yeah, so at the time, VS Code didn't have the features available to do it. So this was kind of what I settled on. Part of the other thing that I enjoyed was having kind of the browser experience that I could kind of bundle together, right? So all of the things that I would do on my laptop are very similar to this machine. So I would open up Chrome, for example, and browse, and then I would go to VS Code. So all of my hotkeys remain the same. All of the keyboarding kind of remain the same. At least personally, I get used to my hotkeys, which is, again, lovingly crafted, bespoke sort of thing. And so I like mapping them and continuing to use them. So that's why I ended up doing this. But actually, I've been really impressed with a lot of the features coming out of VS Code, so that's probably something a lot easier to use.
Any more questions? Okay.
Cool. Thank you all.